Does your child have trouble waiting their turn, calming down after a meltdown, or remembering to put on their shoes when you ask them to? These don't feel like skills when you're watching your toddler struggle with them. They feel like personality, something your child either has or doesn't. But what if I told you that every one of these moments actually executive function in action, and that the habits you build or don't build with your child in these early years quietly shape whether they grow into a kid who can manage their own homework, their emotions, and eventually their own life? Welcome to A Parent's Guide to Child Development. I'm your host, Annamarie von Firley from Fledgling's Flight. Each podcast, we strive to give parents the tools they need to help their child thrive through conversations with experts in child development and psychology, where you can learn about the most important information that you didn't know existed. Today, we're getting a rare kind of preview. Our guest works with teenagers and young adults who are still struggling with the very foundations most of us assume kids just pick up along the way: starting tasks, managing time, regulating emotions, and follow through with things. Diana Pellicano is the director of College Success Program at Grow Now, where she works closely with students and families to build internal executive functioning skills necessary for independence, self-regulation, and long-term success. Diana specializes in supporting high school students preparing for college and college-level students with ADHD and executive function delays. Consider this episode a look into the future, a chance to see right now, while your child is still small, what it looks like when these skills are built well, and what it can look like years later from now when they aren't. Diana, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited. So, as you're kind of hitting the sweet spot for me personally, because I have a son who's getting ready to go to college, who's 17 years old, which is exactly the type of people that you work with right
Yep.
now. Um,
Yep.
and, giving me this chance to reflect on what I could have done differently or what I did right when he was, very young, when people don't even think about executive function skills. Because I feel like if people know what they are, they don't really see them play out in a way that they could be dysfunctional until kids are in school, until there's homework, until there's deliverables that need to be done at a certain time. And younger, we don't see them, or we don't recognize them, I should say. But for a parent who's never heard the term executive function, how would you describe them?
Yeah, so you made a really good point too that most people think of executive functioning as time management and organization, right? And most of them are saying things like, well, it won't really affect them until they're in school and they're managing schoolwork. But that is, not the case. Executive functionings, I want everyone to realize it's our self-management system in our brain. So think about the back of our brain is where we learn and our knowledge. And the front of our brain, that prefrontal cortex, is where we do and we show what we're supposed to be doing. We show what we know in the natural environment. So for example, you might have a 8-year-old boy who you tell over and over again, you have to be quiet when you go into the library. You have to be quiet when you go into the library. What does that 8-year-old do as soon as he gets into the library? He's not quiet. Is it a lack of knowledge and him not remembering the direction? No, it is a lack of performance. It is a lack of showing what he knows and managing his impulse to shout and make his classmates laugh and get that quick dopamine hit. So the executive functioning skills are really that old saying of stop and think. It's a kid and individual's ability to stop, visualize the consequences or rewards of what action they're about to make, and talking to their brain to make a good decision in the moment that will benefit them in the future with a delay. And actually, little fun fact that humans are the only species on this planet that are able to pause and stop and think and aim our behavior now towards the delayed future. Every other species on this planet needs a consequence or reward staring at them right in the face immediately. We can think into the future and think, okay, if I make my classmates laugh, then I will lose privileges, or then I won't be able to play the game at the end of class, whatever it may be. So I'm going to choose to not act on that impulse and make a better decision for myself now that will benefit me in the future. And how we really work on these skills with students is understanding that to build executive functioning skills, to have good executive functioning skills, you need a strong nonverbal working memory, which is our visual imagery system, and we need a strong verbal working memory, which is our self-talk system. And we need the nonverbal and the verbal working memory to work together. And what this looks like for an adult, I like to say, is I hate cleaning. Okay. It is like my most non-preferred task. I don't like doing it. I could impulsively start doing other things that are way more stimulating and give me more dopamine. But how do I motivate myself to do this non-preferred, boring task? I visualize my house being clean. I visualize the end result. And when you visualize, certain sensations come back to you. So I visualize that preview of feeling satisfied that my house is clean, feeling relieved that I'm in a more structured environment where it's not chaos all around me. And then from there, I talk to my brain and I remind myself it's not going to take as long as I always think it's going to take. I've done this before. It's going to feel good when it's done. Let's go. Let's get moving. So, that right there, that whole internal stop, visualize, talk to my brain, that is executive function in a nutshell. So, for that 8-year-old boy that I just referenced, a good executive function for him would be, okay, I know the rules. I need to be quiet at the library. I walk in. Oh man, I'm feeling this urge, this temptation to yell because I know it'll get a quick laugh from my friends and that'll make me feel good. But I'm going to stop. I'm going to visualize making those kids laugh. I'm going to visualize kind of feeling bad when I get in trouble by the teacher and missing out on a fun activity later because I didn't follow directions. And I'm going to tell my brain, if I make this choice, then I'll regret it later. Then I'll miss that fun thing later. So I'm going to not do that. And all of that, so teaching kids to visualize, and what we call it is making a mental movie of the future, or we make mental movies of the relevant past. Maybe the last time we were asked to go quietly into the library, how did that go? We visualize how that all went. And then the verbal working memory is what we call the brain coach, where we're talking to our brain and we're helping our brain make decisions that will help us in the future. So, long answer to your
Right.
question, but that is executive functioning.
It's so interesting. I've never really heard of, and again, I don't have the degrees that you have, but I haven't heard of nonverbal and visual. Those are the two, right? Nonverbal and
So
visual
it's
working memory.
nonverbal working memory is your visual imagery system,
Okay, nonverbal
and
and
verbal working memory is your self-talk system.
so interesting because I've always talked about working memory, so I'm clear on that, but I didn't realize there are two different types of
Oh,
working memory.
yes.
So, okay.
Yes. Yeah, and what we find typically, so kids who have ADHD have executive functioning delays. So the kids that we say who have ADHD or who just have executive functioning delays without ADHD, because you can have executive functioning delays without ADHD, they all pretty much across the board are struggling and delayed in developing either the nonverbal working memory or the verbal working memory or both. And I'm sad to say that when they do talk to their brain and when they do remember and visualize, it tends to be negative because they get so much negative feedback from peers, from teachers, from their parents. They're always the kids that are impulsive. They're getting in trouble. They're not stopping and thinking, right? It's like, why won't you just follow directions? It's because they're lacking in this ability to stop what they would have done on impulse by visualizing and talking to their brain first.
Huh. Is this at all related to well, my husband and I are older parents, but lately I've noticed that he does a whole lot of talking aloud to himself. And so I think he's talking to me. And he's like, oh, no, no, I'm just talking to myself. And only because you talked about verbal and nonverbal working memory, I'm like, is that it's some kind of way of remembering something? Because saying aloud, like what, I don't know. Is that related to anything?
Absolutely, absolutely, honestly. And when you have a hard time with working memory, with talking to your brain and thinking and manipulating your thoughts, sometimes internalizing the self-talk to keep you on track, to motivate you, to make good choices, it needs to be verbalized out loud to keep it organized in your head. So that might be almost a compensatory strategy he's using if his brain is tired and not wanting to just be saying it all in his head more privately.
Yeah, I remember for my son, well, I think just because this generation of digital natives like are used to seeing like YouTubers that completely narrate their life at all times. And I remember him sort of modeling that as a kid and like, keep it in your head, man. I do not need to
That's
hear
such
you
a good
narrate
point.
your
I
life.
never thought of that before, but yeah. And that is something that I want to touch on throughout this interview as well, is the importance and the impact of what they see from their parents, of how their parents model executive functioning and strategies to manage what they would do on impulse, to manage their self-regulation skills, self-motivation skills. So absolutely, he probably saw that on YouTube and is now doing what he has seen people he looks up to do. So that's a really good point.
So, can you go into more depth about what all the skills that fall under executive functioning are?
Yes. So when you think about it, when you have that good internal system with the visual imagery and the self-talk, what that ends up doing is it builds the pillars of true executive functioning, which are not just time management and organization and all of that. The true executive functioning pillars are self-awareness. Okay, so how aware are we of ourself, of maybe needing help with something? How aware are we of how we impact others? Are we making people feel uncomfortable? Are we kind of having a hard time reading the room? Do we have any idea of that at all? I get a lot of students who come to me and they're like, I'm fine. My mom is just overreacting. Like, there's nothing wrong. And they're great kids. But they definitely need some help in some areas, right? But there's that lack of self-awareness. So that's step one. The second one is self-regulation. How are we able to regulate our emotions in a stressful situation with pressure? I hear a lot of, it's too much pressure, I can't do it. It's too much pressure, I can't do it. How do we do with self-regulation with sitting down and doing something boring that we don't want to do? That all requires self-regulation. Really, any delayed reward requires a level of self-regulation to wait for that reward. Instant gratification doesn't require any self-regulation skills. And especially with this generation, it's very hard for kids to have that delayed gratification. So that's something that I feel like we always are trying to teach kids and work on with them. The next one is self-motivation toward non-preferred tasks. Parents will say, oh, they're so motivated. They will read a whole entire book in a week, or they will play Minecraft for 3 hours. They can totally motivate themselves and pay attention. But yes, of course they can do those things because they love them and it's giving them the dopamine hit and it's very rewarding and it's not requiring any kind of self-control, emotional regulation, or executive functioning skills to do it because they love it. So the key here is how do they do with doing a boring, low stimulating, non-preferred task with chores, with homework, with playing a game that their sibling wants to play and not a game that they want to play? How do they do with that stuff? That is a core pillar of executive functioning. The next one is self-evaluation. So how do they do with reflecting? Do they think back? Do they visualize how something went and talk to their brain and think, how did that go? What will I do the same next time? What will I do differently next time? What did I learn, right? Is it just kind of negative, negative, negative of like, I'm terrible at this. I'll never be good at this. Or is it, okay, next time I'll do this differently. Is there also a level of accountability? I see a lot of students taking zero accountability for mistakes that they made and how they make others feel. I can't tell you how many times I work with a teenager or college student who tells me, well, everyone's failing. This teacher is just way too hard. They're ridiculous. This is just all the teacher. Instead of saying, okay, this is a tough teacher. Next time, I'm going to go into the office hour. I'm going to study a little bit harder. I'm going to write down my notes. That's all part of the self-evaluation process. And then finally, what I find the most important, because it's really the verbal working memory, is that self-language. So, how are we talking to ourselves in a way that's productive and helpful and motivating? So, just to review, it's self-awareness, self-regulation, self-motivation toward non-preferred tasks, self-evaluation, and self-language. And notice that they all start with the word self. They're all those internal skills. And that's not to say that organization, time management isn't part of executive functioning. When you have those good internal skills, that results in those other more external behaviors like being places on time, organizing our stuff. That makes those more external tasks doable for them. But just making a checklist for your student or getting them all kinds of calendars or prompting, none of that works if those internal executive functioning skills are weak.
That's so fascinating.
Mhm.
What age do these skills start developing?
Pretty much right away. So the brain grows from back to front, okay? And as I shared with the first question, the back of the brain is our knowledge. It's where we learn. And the front of the brain is, again, where we show what we know. And that prefrontal cortex is the very last part of the brain to develop, and it doesn't finish developing or peak in development until someone is 25 to 30 years old. And if you have true executive functioning delays in ADHD, what research has showed is that you can be about 3 to 5 years behind your peers in that development. So when you look at a toddler, a baby, a really little kid, yeah, they're going to have really bad executive functioning skills. That's why like the tantrums are there and the impulse control is bad. Their prefrontal cortex is still very much in the infancy period of development. But yeah, so it develops immediately, like at birth, as they're getting older, but you don't really see good executive functioning skills until later in life.
Huh. Why do you think executive function development gets so little attention compared to things like language or motor development in the first few years?
This is a really good question, and I will even admit, so my background, I'm a speech and language pathologist, and I think I had one class on executive functioning, and it was time management, organization, all of this stuff, right? And the problem with executive functioning is that it's very, very hard to measure.
Mm.
So with language, when I would have my speech sessions with my students, it's like, okay, how many words do they have? How are they producing their R sound? It was very black and white. I could tally up on 80% of trials, they were able to perform this. Executive functions are, it's like, how motivated are they? How did they self-regulate? Did they talk to their brain to help them persevere through a non-preferred task? It's much harder to measure. And for that reason, it's something that's not as targeted and talked about in clinical settings. But I will say that the way we measure it, that I find to be very effective when I work with families, is how dependent are they on parents and teachers and external help to complete something, and how independent have they become over time with intervention.
Hmm. What does executive function skill or struggle with one actually look like in a toddler or preschooler day to day?
Yes, so as I mentioned before, they don't have great executive functionings. Having big tantrums, not having any kind of mental flexibility, being, all these being impulsive, that is just part of how toddlers and preschoolers learn. So expect those behaviors and don't be freaking out like, oh my gosh, my toddler has no executive functioning skills. No toddler does. Don't worry. But what I will say about this is a perfect opportunity to start teaching executive functioning strategies. It's never too early to start teaching executive functioning strategies. So, what I always recommend to my parents from day one, and I do this with my own 3-year-old when she's having tantrums and having a hard time, is when you notice things that are common in kids who have executive functioning delays, such as they typically lack mental flexibility. So you'll see in these students, it's my way or the highway. If there's any sudden change in routine, they freak out, right? Very rigid. So mental flexibility. You see, you see lots of dysregulation. You see very conflict-seeking behaviors. They have a hard time calming themselves down, especially if they're asked to do something that they don't want to do or a non-preferred task. Um, they a lot of times have a hard time with self-monitoring in public and reading a room. So kind of looking around the room, noticing everyone is sitting down quietly and working, and I'm just gonna run in there and just like cause an explosion with my words and my actions, right? So if you're noticing these common challenges with them, it's never too early for the parent to start modeling out loud. I'm noticing everyone else is sitting down and hanging out quietly. I think I'm going to match them. And just modeling out loud what they would be saying in their own head. And even practicing making mental movies of the future, front loading these little kids. So we're going to go to the park at this certain time, or after you go down the slide a certain amount of times, then we're going to go back into the car and we're going to have this snack, and having visuals and showing them, and also almost making a mental dress rehearsal of what that transition is going to look like before they get there so that they can anticipate it. So you're teaching them how to visualize and how to talk to their brain at a young age that will help them as they get older with building these executive functioning skills.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, that made me sort of flash back to when my son was younger and he was learning to play the piano. And every time he would make a mistake, it was like the world was ending. It was a complete
Hmm.
meltdown. I can't do it. I'll never be able to do it. I can't do
Yep,
it. And and I would be like, yeah, but you say this every day. And then what happens? Like you always are able to do it. Like you try a couple
exactly.
more times and you're able to do it. Yeah, so it's so interesting to hear the things that you're saying and see like how I did or did not do these things like when he was little with like real world examples. Because I feel like sometimes when we talk about child development or different types of skills, they feel very abstract to parents until
Yes.
you can like give them really concrete examples of like what it looks like and how to do it. And the other thing that made me remember is being in a mommy and me class when he was like 2.5 or 3, and everybody was sitting quietly in the circle, and
Mhm.
my son is like could not sit in my lap. I was like doing laps around the circle of people. And then, of course, people are like, oh, well, he's just a boy. And turns out ADHD. But so so yeah, so now like upon reflection, like when I see those kids like running from table to table and like doing things like, oh yeah, that's totally ADHD. I know what
Yeah,
that
it could be. It's like that impulse control. It's not reading the room. It's not talking to his brain and noticing what everyone else is doing and matching their behaviors. It's what feels good right now. That's what I'm going to do. I'm not talking to my brain. I'm not doing the stop and think. I'm just going with what feels good and is going to give me the dopamine hit. And honestly, using real life visuals is very helpful for kids because, again, they are lacking in that ability to visualize themselves beyond the here and now, visualize themselves in the future, or visualize themselves in the relevant past. And if you use a real picture, let's say you go to the mommy and me and you take a picture of him actually sitting quietly at the circle time, and you front load before you get to the circle time of, I want you to look like this picture when you get there. Okay, we want to look like this picture. You're helping him compensate for that nonverbal working memory of visualizing himself sitting and participating the way that all the other kids are. That being said, at 2 and 3 years old, I'm not expecting any kid to be sitting down for that long. Like, I always feel like circle time at that age is just an impossible task because attention spans in general tend to be shorter at that age. But that is an example of why real life visuals, not clip art, not a drawing, are really helpful. I mean, even picture. You can look through your phone right now and find a picture of yourself the last time you went on a vacation or hung out with your friends. When you see that actual picture of yourself somewhere, it brings back those emotions and you can really picture yourself there and how you felt and what it was like. More so than if you see like a clip art photo of like a beach. You're not making that same visual connection and it's not hitting your brain the same. So that's a huge, huge strategy is use real life visuals to help them mentally prepare for what's to come. Another really important thing I want to say is when it comes to toddlers and preschoolers, they are going to have these tantrums. They're going to have big behaviors. This is just their brain is on fire. It's developing so quickly. It's very age appropriate. Do not give in to the tantrum and the big behaviors, okay? It's so much easier, right? Like even my daughter this morning was screaming for chocolate for breakfast. I want chocolate for breakfast. Give me chocolate for breakfast. And yeah, it probably would have been easier for me to just give her the chocolate for breakfast. But kids learn at a very young age what works and what gets them what they want. And if they learn that if they have a big enough behavior and if they scream loud enough and if they make enough of a scene, they will get what they want. You better believe that you are just reinforcing that behavior. And I work again with high school students and college students. It gets harder to manage that as a parent as they get bigger, stronger, it gets scarier, honestly, as they get older. So you want to teach these kids young that no matter how much they scream and yell, you are consistent in your expectations and you are consistent in what happens next. And their behaviors, they can have their behaviors, but they're not going to get attention for those behaviors, and they're certainly not going to persuade you to do something that you know as the parent isn't good for them.
Hmm. What role does play, especially unstructured or pretend play, have in building these skills?
Yes. So actually, this always brings me back to just when I first started speech therapy, I started as an early intervention specialist. So I would go in and parents all the time would say, like, seems like you're just playing with my kid. I don't understand. Like, aren't you supposed to be teaching them how to talk? And what's so important for parents to know is that play is how kids learn. It is so important. Kids learn so much more through play than they do with doing flashcards and very structured worksheets. It is the more your kids play, the better their executive functioning skills will be. And I want to also highlight that the more unstructured play, the better their executive functioning skills will be. And play develops as that child's brain develops. So it goes from physical manual play, they're moving around the ball, they're moving around the truck, to more pretend symbolic play. That's where my 3-year-old daughter is right now, where she'll like pretend she's a mommy and put the baby in the crib and then like grab a burp cloth and pretend that that's the blanket and all of that stuff. And then as they get older, it starts to be more mental play and problem solving. And that's where you see whole situations. Like I remember when I was younger, I would play teacher and someone burst into the classroom and then it was like, how do we solve this problem? And honestly, if you think about it, that is executive functioning, right? Imagination is executive functioning. It's that ability to think about the future, anticipate challenges, and play with different problem-solving solutions. So, well, if I do this, then this could happen. But if I do this, then this could happen. That is executive functioning. It's talking to our brain, messing around with different scenarios, and choosing the best option.
Huh, I've never thought, I mean, I've always thought of imagined play as uh doing like social emotional development, but I haven't ever thought of it. Well, some of it I thought of it as executive function, like the whole sequencing and like the planning, like before you cook pasta, like if you're gonna make dinner, you don't like just pour uncooked noodles on a plate. Like you got there's
Right.
sequence to like doing all that and understanding there's a tie between like sequencing and mathematics. But then like also you don't, well, I guess in some kids, because their sequencing skills is just like, oh, we're going to go to Hawaii and like, oh, we're in Hawaii. Like
Right.
there's that jump between like we got to get on a plane and like we just don't like suddenly appear in another place. But it's really interesting to think of it as executive function. Now I'm gonna always talk about it that way.
Yeah. Well, and you made a really good point that it's everything. Again, they are developing the sequencing. They are developing social emotional. Remember that one of the key pillars of executive function is emotional regulation. And one of the strategies that I use across the board with parents, with older students, with younger students is our predictions review model, where we visualize what's coming, we predict a challenge, and we think ahead of time, what will we tell our brain in that moment? What will be our plan B so that we are regulated? So playing with our thoughts does help social emotional situations. It does help with our emotional regulation. You can do it in social situations. I'm going into this play date. This kid, I know he's going to want to play this game that I don't want to play. How am I going to deal with it? Because I know that playing a game and that my friend wants to play makes me a good friend. It can't just be all about me. I'm going to feel frustrated. This is what I'm going to tell my brain. This is what I'm going to deal with so that this friend wants to keep playing with me and being my friend.
Hmm. What does a healthy scaffolding look like at this age, and how much should a parent step in versus let a child struggle with a little?
This is a really good question. So, the first thing that every parent should ask themselves is, what am I doing for my child that they are capable of doing on their own? Because the biggest mistake that I see parents make, very lovingly, of course, is doing too much for their kid that they're capable of doing on their own. And from this, I see a lot of prompt dependence and I see a lot of learned helplessness because the way that we get better at things that we do, the way that we build self-awareness that we even need help, that we gain motivation to learn how to do something is by making mistakes, is by trying and failing and trying again. I find too many parents save them. It's like, "Oh, they're about to take off their shoe wrong, so I'm just going to do it for them. Oh, they're about to spill their water on them, so I'm just going to help them." But it's even little things like that where let them spill, let them struggle taking off their shoe, and let them figure it out. Let them do things on their own and trial and error things so that they learn to be independent. The more you step in and do things for your kid that they can just learn how to do themselves, the more delayed their independence and executive functioning will be.
Oh, wow. Okay. Are there simple routines or language patterns you recommend parents start using with toddlers and preschoolers?
I find that so just in general, if your child has ADHD or if you're thinking, you know what, ADHD runs in my family, executive functioning delays runs in my family because it is hereditary. So I want to start from a young age doing things that will benefit them in the future. Across the board, structure is the key to success for kids and adults with ADHD. They thrive in structure. They do not do so well with ample free time, no structure. It causes dysregulation across the board. So, as much consistency and routine as you can do, the better. And I know that life happens and it's not always possible, but if you can have a morning routine and an evening routine look similar every day, the better. And then, as I mentioned before, a really good strategy is use real life visuals. We have our students make morning maps where the mom or dad takes pictures of probably 8 steps in their morning and afternoon routine. And then I encourage parents use it as like a craft. Have like a little photo shoot and then cut it out and then have your child put it in the order, have them decorate the morning map, then have them make a mental movie of going through that morning routine the night before, maybe even have them act it out in real time so that when that morning time comes, they know exactly what they should look like and what they need to do. Also important for emotional regulation is language makes dysregulation worse. And overly verbally prompting your child keeps them prompt dependent. So that's why visuals are also very key here. So we take the pictures, we do the mental dress rehearsal, they have their morning map, And then in the morning, when they're depending on you and they're looking at you, what comes next? What do I need to do? All you have to say is look at your morning map. Do you match your picture? Where are you in this morning map? And then they have to look at the picture, talk to their brain, and decide independently what they need to do next. The brain takes the path of least resistance. The longer you verbally prompt and remind, the less likely it is that that brain will feel motivated to learn independence and figure it out on their own. It's the quick, if I ask, I get the answer. If I ask, I get the answer. It takes a little bit more time to read the room, look around, remember what you're supposed to do next. But yes, so having those structured routines is very, very helpful.
So for your morning map, is it ideally like on the refrigerator? Does it live in the kid's bedroom? Like where does the maps live? And then do you only have like the morning map out for the morning, or do you have like morning and then after school map and then a bedtime map, and are they all out at the same time?
This is all dependent on the family and what they think will work best. What I usually recommend is put the morning map in a place that's easy to access. So if you live on a house that's one floor and most of that morning routine is in the kitchen or in the bedroom, maybe have one morning map in the bedroom, one morning map in the kitchen. If the child, I've had some students almost make like a little necklace that they put over them, and it's kind of like each step they just look at the next thing on their ring. I've had some where it's almost becomes like a placemat where they sit and they have their breakfast or their dinner. So even breakfast and dinner, they can be like looking at it and kind of reviewing in their head. It's really just whatever works for the family. And I have to say too, with all of these strategies, it is not like suddenly they have amazing executive functioning. It takes time and it's a lot of trial and error, right? So maybe we try the pictures in the room first, and if we find that they're just struggling with that, then we try the placemat at the dinner table. It's whatever ends up working for your family, but it's not a quick fix. So you got to kind of work out the kinks and see what works best for you.
Yeah, that's amazing. Does screen time play a role in executive function delay?
Absolutely, yes, yes. So neurologically speaking, if you have ADHD, you have a lower level of dopamine at baseline in your brain. And so what happens is the brain is constantly looking for the dopamine hits, and screens are a huge dopamine hit. So kids who have ADHD and executive functioning delays tend to be a little bit more prone to screen addiction. I feel like we see it all the time where parents are saying they're not doing their homework, they're not doing any chores. They're very combative. They're not making friends. And then I always ask, okay, well, what are they doing? 9 times out of 10, it's on a screen, right? They're playing video games, they're scrolling on their phone, they're watching TV. And I will say, like, TV is not as much of a dopamine trigger because you're just kind of mindlessly watching a story versus when you're playing a video game and you're getting to the next level and you're getting a token and it's like dopamine hit, or like when you're on your phone and you're scrolling and each little ad is a dopamine hit. That hardwires the brain to need instant gratification constantly. It's overloading the brain with always needing to be stimulated. And as a result, we have found that kids have a really hard time being bored and being regulated when they're bored. They don't know what to do because their brain hasn't practiced sitting and being bored and being regulated. Their brain is constantly, no, 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 no. I need to be stimulated right now. I need the dopamine hit. Where is it? And when it's not available, they have a big meltdown. And what do we do when we're bored? We talk to our brain. We visualize our day. Literally, our executive functions grow when we are bored. Being bored is a great executive functioning exercise. So if your kid says to you, I'm bored, that's good. It's good to be bored. Talk to your brain. Think about what's coming up in the future. Reflect on something that happened yesterday, right? Practice being bored and being regulated. Screens take that away.
Hmm. How does the household structure and routine or lack of it influence a young child's developing executive function?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, when you have a consistent, structured routine, it helps the child anticipate what's coming and understand their own expectations so that they can be more independent. Versus if everything is scattered all the time, then they genuinely might have to be constantly asking you what comes next. I'll also say that more structured routine home is a more regulated home because the biggest behaviors and dysregulation happens typically when something unexpected occurs to that child, and then they don't know how to regulate themselves in the moment. So, as much routine and predictability as there can be, I find that it increases independence and it decreases dysregulation.
Hmm. You work primarily with teenagers and young adults now. When you meet a student who's really struggling, can you usually see the roots of it going back to early childhood?
Yes, for the most part, yes, I do. And you can probably anticipate what I'm going to say. For the most part, a lot of it comes from a learned helplessness sense where their parents very lovingly, and I have to preface this by saying I completely understand. School is harder now than it's ever been. Expectations are harder now than it's ever been. And it's very innate to go in and help your child, help them organize their schoolwork, help them set up appointments with doctors and email teachers. But the problem is when you save them too much and you overhelp and you act as their homework secretary, it stunts their growth from building up a tolerance and learning those skills themselves. So when they go to college and they no longer have mom acting as their executive function and telling them exactly what they need to do and when, they flounder. And as I mentioned before with the back of the brain and the front of the brain, executive functioning delays are not it's not an intellectual deficit. In fact, I have a lot of students who are twice exceptional, brilliant kids who literally got to a big reason that they got to college is because they never needed to study. They just were geniuses, right? But they, and on top of that, their parents were helping them too much in a way. And so they really struggled. And just, I think it's so important for parents to hear too, let your kids struggle. Let them fail a test. Let them have a cringy moment with a friend so that they get that peer feedback so that it's not all just coming from you. I find that that's really, really important because, again, so many teens are like, well, I have A's and B's. Like my mom is just overreacting. Like, and they lack that self-awareness, realizing you only have A's and B's because your mom is acting as your homework secretary. Without her, I don't know. This is going to be a struggle.
Yeah, but I think it's hard for parents because it feels like high school grades are so consequential as far as like getting into colleges and stuff. And they probably like, oh, I don't want them to like miss any opportunities. I know that's something that I certainly struggled with when my son, he goes to a boarding school. And in that first year, the school kept saying like, let your kid fail, let your kid fail. And now that he's like a senior and like GPAs are like a thing, and they're not just looking at senior and junior year when they're, more developed mentally and have more executive functioning skills, but like they're taking in that freshman year where we let failure happen. And then it's like, okay, well, there are consequences because now his GPA will never be as high as he needs to get into certain colleges. So I see that struggle from a parent's point of view,
Totally.
just like thing, but these are huge consequences. So,
Totally. But what I want to really affirm for parents is that there is way too much emphasis on grades.
yeah,
It
there
is, I just really feel like every time I get a case, the parent is like, okay, so their GPA is going to go up. We need them to get A's. We need them to get B's. But what people need to remember is that we need to look at the whole picture and development of your child. And more than grades, more than IQ, more than what college you go to, one of the number one indicators of long-term success is executive functioning skills. You can have your mom help you all through high school and get into a really great, well-known school, but if you're not able to motivate yourself to do a boring task, emotionally regulate when things get hard, self-evaluate and take accountability, you're going to have a really hard time out in the real world getting a good job versus somebody who doesn't go to as great of a college, but you know what? They're an amazing team worker. They work so hard. They're emotionally regulated. That's the person that's going to get promotions and keep growing in their career. So you have to keep that in mind that it's not just all about grades.
Yeah, no, I hear you. That's so true. So, what does executive function delays look like in elementary school versus middle school versus high school?
Okay, yeah, that's a really good question. So I'll say that elementary school is when you start to notice differences. So, as I mentioned earlier, when you have a toddler or a preschooler, they're all kind of having tantrums. They're all kind of running around the mommy and me class. It's like, it's normal, right? People are like, he's a boy, he's a toddler. You get those reactions. As you get into elementary school, this is where demands of peer relationships change a little bit. This is where demands of school changes a little bit. We have to do a little bit more non-preferred activities. Peers might start noticing, like, I don't really like that cringy joke anymore. You might be at a birthday party and your child is the only one having a huge meltdown tantrum when it's not the flavor of ice cream that they like. That's when you start noticing those differences and the mental flexibility and the emotional regulation and even like being able to reflect back later that night before they go to bed, like let's talk about what happened and they completely forgot what happened and they don't even remember and can talk about it, right? Those are signs that maybe executive functioning skills are lagging a little bit, I'd say, in that elementary. And then it gets even more in middle school. That's really where you see like the class clown is no longer fun to be around, and kids don't really want to hang out with that kid because they're getting in trouble or they're dominating conversations. They're lacking that perspective taking because in a conversation, they're not talking to their brain and thinking, am I allowing this person to have a chance to talk? Do they even like this topic that we're talking about? It's just, I like this topic. It gives me dopamine hits, so I'm just going to bombard the conversation. So you'll see a lot of that. Middle school is also where there's more long-term projects, tests. That's where these things start to come into play. So that requires more executive functioning skills of regulating ourselves, planning, sitting down and doing that boring, low stimulating task, and planning for the future, chunking it. And then, of course, high school is when we really see it, right? And that's more of where I see teens becoming almost more quiet, who lack in social executive functioning skills and very avoidant. So that's where I see a lot of phone addiction, video game addiction, where they like to stay in their comfort zone and avoid any kind of experience where people will see that they're having a hard time. But the thing to remember with social executive functioning is that the only way to get better at social skills is to practice social skills in the real world, not on a video game, not through a phone, because those only require language. When we are in person, we are reading body language, we are making eye contact, we are sharing a space with somebody. It feels a little bit more uncomfortable for some people versus just like hanging out in their room behind a screen. And everything we do in life, we build up a tolerance to. So that, but I really want to point out that importance because I hear a lot of parents say, well, that's their only social outlet. But okay, sure, they might be talking to people, but if you want your child to get better at executive functioning skills in the real world, they need to be practicing in the real world.
Yeah, I mean, for us, our son is an only child, and he grew up in a neighborhood where there weren't really any other kids around, right?
Mhm.
And so play dates were like this private school that he went to is like all the way like 19 miles away. So play dates were like they happened, but not like all the time. And he part of the benefit of him ending up choosing to go to a boarding school was that he got to live with his friends and he was with his friends
Yes.
all 24/7 like and he just loves it because he was always a kid who wanted to be around other kids, loved other kids, but like didn't get a lot of opportunity to be around a lot of other kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that, I mean, over the pandemic, he kept
Right.
his social development through video games because no one could see each other in person. And so he did well there, but then like having that opportunity to live with a roommate because he never had
Hmm.
siblings he had to live with and never had to negotiate space with another person.
Right.
All
Right.
those things are so important. He just absolutely thrives in this social setting. And I think the reason I bring that up is because parents may or may not think about social development when they have an only child, right? Like how that limits
Yeah,
their ability and opportunities to be with other children, right? And to be with other people to build
totally.
those skills.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And, I think boarding school for your family certainly worked out amazingly because, as you said, now he's getting real life over and over again experience of how to interact with people. He's getting better at it, he's getting more comfortable with it, and now he's probably a little social butterfly out there. And if you don't have the means and you don't send your kid off to boarding school and you have an only child, or if you do have different children, but you're just noticing that they're going to school and they're coming home and they're staying home and they're going on their laptop all day, we need to sign them up for more activities.
Yeah.
Executive functioning skills are built through experience and they're built through varied real life in-person experiences, not online. So we need to get them out of their comfort zone. We need to get them into clubs. And yeah, they're going to push back. It's uncomfortable. It's out of their comfort zone. They're not going to want to do it. They're going to try to fight with you about it. It needs to be an expectation. Because if you want them to build a tolerance and develop these skills, they need to practice the skills.
Yeah. What other neurological or developmental conditions like autism, anxiety, or other learning disabilities commonly overlap with executive function challenges, and how should that shape how a parent responds?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, ADHD and executive functioning rarely stands alone. There's always comorbidities going on. And we see a lot of anxiety, we see a lot of OCD, we see a lot of ODD, we see a lot of social anxiety, autism definitely. And what I'll say is every student that you work with, every family that you work with, you have to individualize what works for them and what doesn't work for them. But across the board, building that internal system of visualizing the future, talking to our brain, that tends to strengthen all of those skills. I see social anxiety go down. I see anxiety go down because suddenly they're on top of their work and they can anticipate when something's going to happen and they have a plan in place of how they're going to tackle it. And just even working on, like I said right before this, the importance of get them out there, get them out of their comfort zone, get them doing things that they otherwise wouldn't do because they're gaining these experiences. I find anxiety and social anxiety tends to get worse the longer that they don't practice, the longer that they go without doing it. And then they just really get it into their mind that I'm not capable. So just keep encouraging your kids to get out there, try new things, meet new people, feel uncomfortable. That's good for them.
Hmm. If you could leave parents with of young children with one reassurance and one piece of advice, what would they be?
Yes. So, number one, always be asking yourself, what am I doing for my kid that they are capable of doing on their own? Okay. That is a very important thing that you should be asking. And the second one is be okay with letting them struggle because struggle is what helps us build self-awareness. It's what helps us build self-regulation because when we struggle, we're practicing regulating ourselves after. So the more that we experience that, the better we get at recovery. It builds self-motivation, it builds self-evaluation. Struggling is actually key to building executive functioning skills. So don't do things for your kids that they're able to do on their own and let them struggle.
How can parents get a hold of you?
Yes. So my name is Diana Pellicano. My nickname is Danny. So when you see Danny Pellicano on the website, that is me. And I run the College Success Program. And I not only provide one-on-one sessions with teenagers and college students, but I provide parent coaching. I provide school trainings. I provide faculty trainings. So all of that are things that I love to do. And you can reach me personally at danny@grownowADHD.com. You can also visit our website, which is grownowADHD.com. And our general contact is the owner and founder of Grow Now, and his email is mike@grownowADHD.com, and his social is @grownowADHD, where you can see his Instagram and YouTube.
Fantastic. And we'll include those in the show notes so no one has to like pause and, and write down like all of those wonderful ways of getting a hold of you. What I love about this conversation is that it takes something that can feel abstract, executive function, and grounds it in the everyday moments of young children that are living through it every day, and the tantrums, the transitions, the waiting, all of this practice, whether we realize it or not. Thank you, Diana Pellicano, for joining us and helping us see today what's really being built in these early years.
Thank you so much for having me. This was very fun.
Yay! Thanks for tuning into A Parent's Guide to Child Development, where we decode milestones, demystify meltdowns, and occasionally question whether goldfish crackers count as a food group. Spoiler, they do. Make sure to follow us on Spotify and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you never miss an expert tip, breakthrough strategy, or aha moment that can make a big difference in your child's development. It's cheaper than therapy and less messy than glitter slime. We'll be back soon with more expert advice, real talk, and zero judgment. Until then, keep calm and try not to step on any Legos.